So now, let's talk about contextually. So this is kind of how the empowered wealth system was born. And so we started, I was driven by the fact that this 97% figure. I started working when I started working, I worked for a firm out of Los Angeles called Financial Industries Corporation. I came in and I was working in the estate planning division. I was just fresh out of college. And I came in there and worked with a guy by the name of Wallace Ream. I don't know if you ever heard of him, R-E-A-U-M-E. And so he had a national practice of working with it. I was not an attorney. I was in there because of my financial services background, so I was working with him. But I came in there and he had clients that included presidents of the United States. He had clients that included some of the top entertainers. And I had so many wonderful experiences early on. I can remember sitting at the Brown Derby restaurant. And if you've ever been to Brown Derby, it's a big restaurant in Hollywood, We're sitting down there. I'm this kid sitting there watching this thing. Wally's sitting there like this, and he has a Mark-a-Lot, one of these Sharpies. And he's sitting there and he's talking to him, and I can see him getting emotional with his clients and just kind of going at it. And he takes his arm like that, and he clears this white linen tablecloth off in one of the most fanciest restaurants, takes out this Sharpie and starts diagramming all this stuff for this thing right all over the table. I'm just like, ah! I can see his clients were going, ah! And he's going through this thing like this. Everybody left him alone. Unbeknownst to me, he had bought the tablecloth before we ever got there. But it was a great environment for me to be able to kind of mature in this industry. I would go to probate court every Friday. Believe it or not, that's how nerdy I was. I'd go to probate court every Friday and sit with this attorney. His name was Zabriskie. I'd sit next to him, we'd listen to these probate cases, and we'd dialogue about them afterwards. I got impassioned with how does money move from one generation to the next? How do you get that money from one generation to the next? And I was just enthralled by it. I was enthralled by all the technical aspects. How do you set up the trust? Well, what if you did trust this way? What if you put the clause this way? What if this happened this way? What if this? And I was just constantly asking questions like a little kid. I was driving him crazy. Because I was sitting there thinking, wow, this is really a miracle. Then somewhere along the line, as I moved into the late 80s and early 90s, I became just bombarded by the fact, just gobsmacked. I like that word. Is that a bad word in London? I just want to make sure I'm not saying a cuss word in London. But anyway, gobsmacked by the fact that wealth does not move through the generations. And why am I in this business? Why am I in this industry? Why am I even doing this if in the fact doesn't matter what we do, if 97% of all wealth doesn't make it through the third generation anyway? And I started seeing examples of this. I started reading case studies, and I read about Cornelius Vanderbilt. And he died in 1887, the wealthiest man on the planet. The Bill Gates of his day, or the Carlos Slim, depending on which month it is. But he was the guy, he was the one that had the more wealth than anybody else. And there were no estate tax laws in 1887. There were no tax laws that would take his wealth away if he died. But yet in 1972 or 3, I can't remember the exact, it was 72 or 73, at Vanderbilt University, according to their own record, which I can show you, I have it in the room right over here, I can show you where they stood up and said, we have over 100 Vanderbilt families here today, not one millionaire amongst the bunch. And then I started digging and I started realizing that what a tragedy this was. And if we're supposed to be these great thinkers that are helping families move their wealth from one generation to the next generation, and only 2 to 3% of them are successful, that's an indictment on the industry. It's a cottage industry that's phony, that's really built around the concept. And I sat with the senior tax partner in a firm in Toronto, and she told me, she said, Lee, we would like to do all this planning that you talk about doing. We would really love to do all this planning. But the reality is, to get a check from our clients to do the planning, it might cost us $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 to do the planning, and they act like they're having a heart attack. So we just if they don't want to do it, we just kind of do the simple stuff, the regular stuff. We let it happen because we know we're going to make hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of dollars when they die. And nobody questions us asking them for a check then. I said, wow, that's my industry. Really proud of it. And so this started this whole question of what is my responsibility to my wealth? What is my stewardship responsibility? Where is it where I want to go? And how do we change this? How do we really make a difference? So I started asking that question. And when do the great ideas come to you? Do they come when you're asking for them? Or do they just show up? Driving home when you're wearing one of your hats, boom, there it pops up. Or for me, it's in the shower. I'm in the shower and all of a sudden, bam, I get this hot idea and you start working. So it happens in the shower. So I started thinking about this. So this idea came to me about, what we're really talking about is we started looking at the wealth. And we did bring in, we brought in new techniques. I actually wrote some verbiage that's still being used to this day around the concept of relevancy. And we're not going to go into structure at all in what we're talking about here today. But what we are going to go into, again, is that vision and trying to give us the vision. So when you really looked at this, I got out, wrote it all down, got on an airplane, flying to Atlanta, sitting next to a wonderful lady. We get talking, to chit-chat. And what do people ask? How long does it take people to ask to say, what do you do? About 3 seconds. You got to size them up to see whether you want to talk with them anymore, right? So, so we're chit-chatting. We said enough that I knew that she had 2 children, and then I finally had to say, well, what do you do? And then she says, well, I have a jewelry store. I make custom-made jewelry, and my daughters help me, and it's really cool. And my husband, well, he manages the majority of the property for Ted Turner in the western United States.
Hello?
I said, oh, really? So now I decided at that moment that maybe we needed to talk a little bit more, So we chit-chat and we start talking about things. He says, well, what do you do? Well, it just so happened I had this vision jumping out of the shower in the morning. So I took out, the only thing I had to write on was this napkin. And so it involved this thing that we call the napkin presentation. The napkin presentation goes like this. And I've probably given this presentation, if I've given it once, I've given it 1,000 times or more. At the very top of board meetings to sitting in somebody's living room, to sitting down with them next to them. It's just something very simple but very powerful. So watch with me as we go through this. So I had this napkin. She says, what do you do? I said, I optimize wealth. She says, well, okay, real estate, cash, stocks, bonds, my business. And so we just continue to make a list on down. So really the short of it is you're talking about things, right? And we call those financial assets, financial wealth. Then I ask the question, do you have assets that you value more than your financial assets? Do you have wealth that you value more than your financial wealth? Let me ask you, do you have wealth that you value more than your financial wealth? Family. And that's exactly what she said. She said family. You mean like my daughters and my husband? I said, yeah. She says, well, yeah. I said, so what you're telling me is you wouldn't trade your family for more of this? No. What else? So he said, well, how much will you give me? Okay. So what else? Health. We've had a good conversation and positive focus about health. Would you trade your health for more of this? But yet, don't we all do it just all the time? Another one that came up was my values. She said, my values, my beliefs, my spirituality. She said, I wouldn't trade in. I said, but look at those 3 things. Look at them for a second. I said, have you ever traded this or your family to get more of this?
It's actually the other way.
Yeah. Yeah. You're trading this, hopefully, to get more time with this. You're trading this to hopefully get better health. But then ultimately, at some point in time, all of a sudden that turns around, and you have to start spending you spent your health to get more money. Now you got to spend your money to get better health. Okay? And the values, how do you sell your values? You don't really sell your values, but you see things like that happening all the time. All you have to do is pick up a newspaper and somebody says, because there's a great rule now, depending on, if your lawyers have a different set of values than other people have, because they're operating off of a legal system. And their values are based upon the legal system. It can be wrong, but it can still be right because within the law, and turn it this way, I can still make it right. Therefore, my values are what's right within the legal system, not necessarily what's right. Okay? And so there's a definition of rationalization that I really subscribe to that I think is probably one of the best definitions of rationalization. And the definition of rationalization is lowering your standards down to your level of behavior. Lowering your standards down to your level of behavior. And so when you look at that, that's what people do when it comes to values. Well, the reality is that by going offshore with this, yes, we will make more money ourselves as executives, but in the long run, if we're making more money, then we're more incentivized to do a good job, which ultimately, in a roundabout way, but for sure, will make more money for our shareholders. Does that sound like Enron just a little bit? You see, there's a way that they have to be able to deal with that. There's a way that they have to be able to handle that, and so they handle that through the process of rationalization. All right, so we look at these as our core assets. These are the ones that are intrinsic to us. They're the ones that we're born with. And so I think core assets, family, health, values, my unique ability or the talents that I'm born with, my heritage. Justin talked about the value of his heritage, in a magazine and what that brought back to him. These are things that are core values to us in terms of, where we're at. So our unique ability, talents, values, health, family, you can make a big old list here. There's another category of wealth that we call our experience assets. We talked about that earlier, sitting on the mountaintop. These are experiences that need to get shared or owned, but different experiences. Education. You're not born with an education, right? You're not born with an education. Over here, you're born and you're alive, you got your family, and you start developing your values and your health. But education, you go out and get it. You experience an education. Your relationships, your reputation, your alliances, your networks, skills as opposed to, say, talents, etc. So those are all different things that are part of our true wealth. So when we say that we optimize wealth, we say that we're optimizing this wealth in these different categories. So then you have a fourth category of wealth, which is centered around the concept of gratitude, but gratitude has the ability to permeate through just about everything. And that's your contribution assets that contribute to this wealth. So my wealth consists of financial assets, core assets, experience assets, and contribution assets. And contribution assets are those values that we value, that we want to put back into society, that we want to put back in such a way. They're the legacy breakfast. There's all the different ways that you might find that you can contribute and give back to the world. The contribution asset is based upon two things: attitude and action. Those are the two principles behind it. Now, the government has a definition for contribution assets. What would they call it?
Taxes.
Okay. Now, is taxes a liability or an asset? Where would an accountant put it on your financial statement?
Liability.
Liability. Where do you really feel inside it belongs? As a liability. Okay? But the reality is, the only reason what was the number one thing that families wanted to have? Choice and control. Remember, we surveyed them and they said the number one danger is losing that choice and control. What's the reason that we don't like taxes? We give up what? Choice and control. There may be some things. Some entrepreneur in here offered a wonderful package. I remember I bought it. That would give me the ability to be able to have my taxes only go to those areas that I have choice and control, that I want them to go to. What a great package. Okay? So you really look at this, and so that's choice and control. When I start writing taxes, I feel like I'm giving up choice and control. Which other quadrant is impacted by me writing taxes? Could. Doesn't make it better. Could, but doesn't make it better. It might impact it negatively, okay, in each of these other things. So you got a plus, minus, minus, minus. So if I were to divide the room up right here, right down the middle, and said, everybody on this side of the room, Pat, you decide which side you want to go on, okay? Well, I would wait till you hear what the deal is. So I'm going to divide it right up here, right down through the sternum of Pat right there. We're coming right down here. Everybody on this side of the room from this day forward will pay no more taxes. Everybody on this side of the room going forward over here will get to pay taxes. Which side are you on, Pat? Okay, so Pat went over to that side. So Pat's on this side with you. Now, consequently, as a result of this, from this day forward, you cannot use or avail yourself of or benefit from in any way anything that taxes are used to provide you with. So you're completely... So by the way, I'm not so sure I know exactly how you're going to get home. And I'm not so sure I know exactly how you're going to be able to handle the gasoline thing, because I don't think any dealer is going to let you pay just for the gas without paying for the taxes. And when you need that ambulance or that fire service, I'm not sure exactly how you, and then the education. So there are some issues now that you're dealing with. So now we're meeting a year from now. And Pat's sitting back there, and Scott's sitting next to him like that. And Scott's going to lean over to Pat and said, man, are you still in that group that can't pay taxes? Because all of a sudden you realize, see, it's not the fact that you have to pay taxes that bothers you. What bothers you is you have no control. You have no choice in control of where the taxes go. And you see it going indiscriminately in a number of different ways, and so it upsets you. And so, that's frustrating. That's really frustrating to you. And so now it's the enemy. So how do you bring back choice and control in this whole equation? How do you make this happen? And so out of this sprang this whole idea. I mean, you jump out of the shower and I start thinking about it. The reality is we've been so caught up in these different areas that it just drove me crazy. And so I'm sitting here thinking, I got this question going around in my mind now. I've got to ask her. Do I dare ask her? What if she says the wrong thing? I know what I thought at 4 o'clock. What's she going to say now? So here's my question. When you look at these 4 boxes here, and you think about your 2 beautiful daughters, and you think about their husbands and their children, which of these 4 boxes would you want to transfer to your children? She looked at him, she said, well, all of them. Explain. Well, I would like to see him benefit from our financial efforts, to be able to kind of stand on our shoulders and build things. And certainly I want him to value the family first and to have good health practices and live values. I want him to honor their unique abilities and develop them and honor their heritage. And I want him to have great education and experiences and build upon our relationships and our reputation. I want him to be able to make good alliances and develop skills and have wonderful experiences that they capture. I want him to be grateful. I don't want him to be just takers in society. I want him to be givers to society. So I'd like him to benefit from all of these different areas. I said, okay, well, what if that wasn't possible? What if you could not do that? So what if I said to you, you had to pick one of these that you could not transfer to your children, but you could transfer the other 3? Which one would you not transfer? I was nervous. This is the first time to ask this question. What do you think she said? What would you say? Which one would you not transfer?
Financial.
I've done this, I don't know how many times, and I'm going to say 99+% of the time. And I've actually done it long enough that I know which kind of people will say something else. But you're right. She looked at it, she went just like that. I said, wow. Okay, now I'm getting tinglies because, see, this is starting to answer a big question for me. Because the question I was asking myself is, why am I staying in this business? Why am I staying in this business if it fails? Is it just to make money? What are you doing this for? So I started looking at it and says, wow, this is pretty impressive. Why do you say that? And she took the napkin, and she had the napkin sitting around our tray like that. And she took her finger and she goes, because I know that if my children are rich here, here, and here, this is going to take care of itself. She says, but if they're bankrupt in either this, or that, this is going to go away. I was like, wow. I said, have you ever done estate planning? And she said, several times. See, she's in the old paradigm. And I said, and where did you and your advisors focus? Which of these quadrants did you and your advisors focus on? She was right here. All of them? All your advisors? Yeah, all of them, right here. But didn't you just tell me that if you'd focus on these, that this would take care of itself? And we both had this stunned moment where we didn't say anything. We just looked at it. Because all of a sudden it's so simple. Albert St. George's quote, I quoted it with somebody earlier today, says, discovery consists of seeing what everybody has seen and thinking what nobody has thought. And that was that moment. It was so obvious. It was right there. But nobody had really ever thought that before. We'd seen it, but we hadn't thought it. And so you now ask the question, how do you develop assets in these other areas? How do you fill up the wisdom and the experience, and how do you capture that, and how do you develop that way? And the only way you can do it is through a system, right? We talked about 94% of all failures as a result of the system. So how do you develop systems around that to make that happen? So the system itself is called, we call it the Family Empowered Treasury. It works like a bank. And it's a treasury. When you hear about a treasury is a safekeeping for all of the things that are of value to you. So if it was the word bank, when you hear the word bank, which of these four quadrants would you just normally associate with?
Financial.
So it'd be the repository for the deposit and withdrawal of financial assets. But what we're really talking about here is a treasure box, if you will, that can really, a bank account that's called a treasure account, that is really the deposit and withdrawal of your core assets, your experience assets, your contribution assets, and your financial assets. And you can do that through systems. You see, in our family, I said, how do I collect stories in our family? How do I collect stories of experiences in our family as your family gets bigger? And most people think of families as me, my parents, my grandparents, my children, my grandchildren. Very, very vertical. But the reality is, how do you expand that? Think of the wealth of knowledge that's in a horizontal family. What do you know about your brothers and sisters? What do you know about the experiences that they're having? Are they having experiences that can help you and give you wisdom in building and developing your family in any one of these four areas? But as brothers and sisters separate, all of a sudden their knowledge banks get completely separated. Their wisdom banks get completely separated. They're developing wisdom on their own. They're not bringing it together for the benefit of everybody else. And so these horizontal families miss out on the vertical concepts of being able to make things powerful, make things happen. So how do you capture these kinds of experiences as they happen? So I said, how do I capture stories? So years ago, we sat down and said, well, let's start out something simple. And so we took everything begins with traditions is the simplest way to create systems, by the way. The fastest and easy way to create systems is through traditions. So we developed this white tablecloth. And the white tablecloth, every year between Thanksgiving and New Year's, we have this celebration we call Thanksmas or Christgiving, depending on which member of the family that we're talking with. But anyway, so we traced our hands. So we trace our hands on this, and everybody that comes to our home, really, but mostly of our family, and we trace the hands, and we ask them to write down one story or things that they're grateful for that happened during the previous year. Just write it down. So they trace their hand, they put their name, they put the date, and they write down at least one or more stories of something that's happened during the last year. And all of a sudden, at the end of that time period, at the end of that period, I had all these stories collected on the top of this white tablecloth. And it was big enough that I could use it the next year. We found we can get 3 years out of these great big white tablecloths. And so now this last year we finished the third year on our third tablecloth. And I looked at this tablecloth, and I'm going there, and you're seeing some old girlfriends that our kids had, that put their name on there, going, can't you just scratch that one off there? And you're seeing these different things. But I watch my dad, who's in his 80s, and he's very feeble, and I watch him tracing his hand. He looks so forward to this. And this last time, we were down there just a week after he got out of the hospital from a heart attack. And he writes, I am so grateful for doctors. And he writes it real slow. He says, I'm so grateful for doctors so that they can allow me to spend time with the people I love. And I thought, wow. And we knew the date. And we knew what happened, And then we see the little tiny kids with these tiny little hands, and they got them on there. And they write they're thankful they went to the zoo, or they went and wrote Disneyland on it and made a little mouse out of it, and they draw a little. They're like my mom. My mom's reached the point where she colors her fingernails and draws funny faces on it. So you kind of see this reversion from the little kids to my mom. But still, you just see them all over the place. But if I tried to collect these stories and see now if they can't make it to our house, they have a way we box it up and send it to them. Because it's become part of the culture. It's become a tradition. And so if you can develop that as part of the culture or tradition, now they're all of a sudden catching stories. What are your traditions? How do you name them? How do you name those experiences? How do you own those experiences? How do you develop them so that they'll outlive you? How do you bank them? How do you put them in the treasure box? And this is one of literally, I can share with you tons and tons that have come from other clients and other people and in our own family that we've worked with that develop systems around concepts, tools around concepts that are aligned with the principles of your family. That's all traditions are. Tools that are aligned to reinforce concepts based upon your principles that are then going to outlive you. That's the beauty of it. So can you bank in this? And yes, I can tell you how families where their kids have come up and said, can you loan us some money so we can develop a piece of property? This happened. A young family of ours said, can we loan us some money so we can develop this property? Well, have we ever developed property in this family before? No. But I know we can do it. Our neighbors have told us that if we bought this lot over here, we just divide it up, we could put about 40 or 50 homes on it, and we could make a ton of money. And you got plenty of money, so loan us the money. Well, they had the training, so they said, well, okay, first of all, We don't have any experience assets in our bank for this. We don't have any experience assets. So we're just saying no until you can prove to us that there's an experience asset. So they went out and found a relationship. Somebody was willing to work with them that was a developer, had tons of experience. So they did a pro forma, brought it together. They came back in. They said, okay, we think we got it figured out. All right, how's it going to benefit the family bank financially, the family treasury financially? They said, well, here's the pro forma. We couldn't get 50 homes like we thought, but we can get 34. And this is how much money we'd make, and this is how much. Okay, that's great. How's it going to benefit the core assets value of this family? How's it going to make it stronger? How's it going to increase that bank account within our treasury? What's that going to do for us? And the daughter in her wisdom said, you know, I've lived in the shadows of my parents because her parents were both very famous. They both had developed their own wealth separately. They were both first generation. The wife had developed hers in corporate. The husband had developed his in sales. And so they developed, a huge estate. And they said, you know, so we've always been in your shadows. This will give me a chance to develop something on my own, to develop my own self-esteem, my own confidence. And they said, well, that would be great. Would that raise the value of the bank if we had increased self-confidence, if we had increased self-esteem in here? Absolutely. Wow. What's that going to do for experience? Well, nobody's ever done this before. So we're going to do it, and we'll gather the information, and if anybody else in our family ever wants to do it, we'll have it all gathered together so they can do it. Terrific. What about contribution? How are you going to get back? And her husband, the son-in-law, says, and they're like 23, 24. He says, well, we'll pay taxes on it. And we said, that's not good enough. So Dad said, that's not good enough. You have to figure out how you're going to take choice and control over that asset. Remember, we've talked about that in our family meeting. We've talked about choice and control. How would you take choice and control over this? So with the guidance of their dad, guidance of their mom, they went out and started looking out. They found a nursing home that wasn't too far from their property. They went in and had a tour. Said, how can we help you? They said, we need new beds. We need these kind of things. And he said, well, if we were to give you $400 for every lot that we sell and we develop over here, would that help you? And they said, well, that'd be what, $12,000, $13,000, $14,000? That'd be amazing. Would you do that? Absolutely, we'll do that. So then they run back to mom and dad and say, look, okay, plus, right, what works money, plus self-esteem, plus we're going to give it back to the bank, this knowledge, and plus, look what we're going to do for this shelter for battered women. I said, okay, here's the deal. We'll make you the loan. It's going to be a very low interest rate, but because it's set up this way, and we got to benefit the family financially, for every lot you develop, we're going to charge you the lowest rate we can charge you, but you're also going to pay us a bonus for every lot you develop. Fair enough? And we'll be there with you and help you guys. Fair enough. Done. Did the deal. Between Christmas and New Year's, a year and a half later, I had the opportunity to sit with them in a retreat. See this daughter stand up, hand each member of the family a notebook that told you how to develop property, how to develop a real estate section. Had a DVD, or not DVD, but a CD, where she put all the documents and all the files and everything, so they'd all have the documents and files on it. Stand up in front of her dad and mom. I did not tell you they were divorced. This is the first time they'd sit back down together. And so they're sitting there in the audience as the daughter explains to them and her husband how to develop this real estate project and how they did it. And when they got done developing it, they then shared with them a check for their money that they'd earned on each lot. And then finally, they handed them a letter that came from the Shelter for Battered Women. And they handed that letter and said, thank you very much. And oh, by the way, we went out into the community and we were able to get pledges for what you agreed to do. And we actually made twice as much. And there was actually a newspaper article that somebody had picked up on it and written an article on it in the local newspaper. And they brought that article and showed it to mom and dad. How do you think mom and dad were going? They had to get new buttons for their shirts. You know, they were just busting. Tears were falling. They couldn't believe this was happening with their kids. They came around. What was the score here, by the way? Plus, 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 plus. They could have just given them the money like that. They could have just given them the money. And that's what so happens so much all the way. You know, your kids come to you and say, Dad, you know, I've been skateboarding an awful lot lately. I really think there's a new way to develop a skateboard. Can you give me about $75,000 to develop a skateboard and start a company? What would you say? You'd say, well, all right, wait a minute, son. Let's talk about this. You know, do you have a business plan? Do you have this kind of thing? And you'd run them through the ringer. You'd run them through the ringer, and you'd sit and you'd work with them like this, and if you decided to go ahead with it, you'd only do it if you went through the ringer and you walked through them and went through them like this. But all you got to do is die. All you got to do is die. I went through a family member's will, and I about threw up yesterday. It's 2 days. Yesterday. You know, he's developed this thing. I've been after him for a long time. He's been developing his own wealth, been going through things in his will just very well. If he dies, third. Done just like that. So his kid could have been begging him for $75,000 one day, and his dad's not going to give it to him because he's not prepared to receive it. And the next day, guess what? He's going to get about $7 million. And nobody has to ask him anything. Doesn't have to prove anything. Just gets it. So is the solution then to give it to him in stages? No. Is the solution then to give it to charity and not give it to him? No. The solution is, how do you then develop leadership principles within your family, within the family treasury? How do you develop traditions? How do you develop systems that start selling and making all of this happen?